All major religions have prophecies of a promised one who will usher in a golden age. The Messiah, the return of Christ, the 10th Avatar, and the 12th Imam. Today, many have put aside these prophecies, never imagining that they could come true, especially in their own lifetime. But this was not always so. Less than 200 years ago, people all over the world experienced an intense and immediate expectation of a promised one. Major world religions, such as Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, were each independently identifying the same time period, the mid-19th century, for the appearance of their promised one. In England, France, Germany, Holland, Sweden, and other countries, Christians were actively waiting to receive the fulfillment of prophecies that they were convinced were imminent.
In the early 19th century, especially for Protestants in America, there was a lot of religious fervor. Revivals were being preached in churches, out in the fields, and in these revivals, people were hearing that Jesus Christ would return again and that the world would be purified by fire.
At that time, a man named William Miller became convinced that the second coming, or second advent of Jesus Christ, could be calculated to the day and set out to prove it.
William Miller went through the Bible meticulously, and he matched historic events that had already happened with prophecies in both the Old and the New Testaments. And to his great surprise, he discovered, first of all, the first advent was there, prophesied in the Old Testament, and then that the second advent was coming.
He compared the prophecies with actual historical events that seemed to fulfill prophetic promises, and computed very rationally the date when all the prophecies would be fulfilled.
Thousands of people believed that Miller was right and flocked to what became the American Adventist movement, convinced that Jesus Christ would return on a specific day in 1844.
One can imagine the heightened expectation of people, both the excitement and the fear of what was coming.
The farmers stopped farming their fields. They didn't do the harvest.
Some people confessed to crimes so that they wouldn't have the crimes on their conscience when Jesus came.
People who drank gave up alcohol. People really changed the way of living, ready for this fantastic moment.
On October 22nd, 1844, 100,000 followers gathered together in churches, homes, and fields in anticipation of the promised arrival of Jesus Christ.
When the sun came up on October 23rd, they had to confess to themselves that nothing happened.
It was terrible. It was really terrible. They were completely distraught and weeping.
The day became known around the world as the Great Disappointment.
What I find fascinating is that a similar thing was happening in Persia amongst the Shia Muslims. And extraordinarily enough, the year that they were looking at in their calendar was 1260, which is 1844 in our calendar.
While Christians in the West were awaiting the return of Christ in 1844, at the same time in the East, Shia Muslims also awaited a divine messenger under a different name, the 12th Imam.
They believed that he was in a state of physical concealment. He was alive and present, but he simply could not be seen.
They imagined that this 1,000-year-old person would return to the world as an agent of God to bring peace. That he would use the sword to become a political leader and rule over the world with justice.
Every Shi'i in mid-19th century Iran, of course, had to believe this. Some of them perhaps hoped it would never happen because it would be a great shakeup, according to the prophecies in the Shi'i holy books. Things would be turned upside down. It wouldn't be business as usual when the hidden Imam comes back. Yes, justice would be established, but many things would change.
The Orthodox religious and political leaders of Persia, while they paid lip service to the longed-for advent of the 12th Imam, they well knew that his arrival would signal the end of their power.
On the one hand, they have to constantly show reverence towards the 12 Imam. On the other hand, any person, any movement, which in any form or shape makes a claim of being that millenarian realization, they would fight it with all their power and might.
One of the Shia Muslims who had been waiting for the 12th Imam in the years before 1844 was a religious scholar named Sheikh Ahmad. He led an independent movement of followers known as the Sheikhis in Persia and Iraq.
Sheikh Ahmad gathered around himself students and disciples to prepare the people for the appearance of the Promised One.
The growing Sheikhi movement was a direct threat to the traditional clerics. Despite being persecuted, the Sheikhis' innovative and original teachings continued to attract followers. One of these followers was a brilliant scholar named Sayyid Kazem. He succeeded Sheikh Ahmad and greatly advanced the movement in Karbala. But Sayyid Kazem died without naming a successor.
Prior to his passing, Sayyid Kazem urged his students to do nothing but to scatter in search of the Promised One, whose appearance was imminent.
Another Sheikhi of great significance was a religious cleric named Mullah Hussein. He returned from a special mission to find that Sayyid Kazem had passed.
Mullah Hussein returned to Karbala and he inquired as to what Sayyid Kazem's final instructions had been to them.
What were his last wishes?
And to his amazement, he heard that Sayyid Kazem had stated very clearly to them that upon his passing, they were to do nothing but to scatter in search of the Promised One.
Why are you still here?
In anger, he turned to his fellow Sheikhis, imploring them to do as Sayyid Kazem had demanded. Mullah Hussein and a few others determined to carry out their late teacher's dying wish to find the Promised One.